It's not something where it's just like they didn't like their political opponents and they maligned them in the media. No, they were pushing for people to actually lose their freedoms, their lives, their careers over something that was completely fabricated and made up. That's evil and it's sinister. And this is why I think to this day, if you trust the FBI, if you trust the mainstream media, you have to be a fool. Hey guys, welcome to Base Politics Podcast. I'm Hannah Cox. This is Brad Polumbo. This week, the real Russiagate, charges in the Jordan Neely case, an anti-capitalist cringe, and CBS wants you to eat bugs. Let's jump in. Brad, did you have a good weekend?
I did, and now I'm excited about how we're going to eat these bugs.
I'm dreading that segment. I don't know if you ever did this when you were a kid, but I remember my brother used to get candy that had like a grasshopper, like a dead grasshopper in the middle of it. Do you remember those candies as a kid? And you would lick it. Or, let me just say this. They've been grooming us to eat bugs for a long time, and I have thus far resisted. I do not intend to eat now.
Yeah, no shade to people who eat weird stuff, but I'm just not very adventurous when it comes to food. But I do have a very exciting announcement to open the show, everybody. We will be launching our second Base Politics podcast this week because our plan and our vision is for it to be an umbrella, a network of shows. I will be hosting this show. It will be called Damage Control and focus on the LGBT issues from a center-right perspective, trying to restore sanity to these conversations because, frankly, so many people on the left have lost their minds, but also some people on the right are really taking some backlash too far. I will have a different guest co-host every week, and up first will be Arielle Scarcella, a conservative lesbian YouTuber, and I'm so excited for it to kick off. I'll be posting more announcement information soon, but you can expect the first episode this Saturday.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to that, so make sure you guys tune in. Brad will be available on audio too, or just YouTube?
Yes, there will be a audio podcast feed as well, but the main focus will be YouTube. But Hannah, you've had something interesting going on too. You seem to have triggered a huge horde of pro-Ukraine Twitter accounts that have just been descending on you and memeing you for days at this point. Can you explain to people what the heck is going on?
I mean, I can do my best, I guess. So last week, after CNN hosted a town hall featuring former President Trump, I made both an article and a YouTube video discussing his comments on the Ukraine and Russia conflict, basically making a very anti-war stance and saying that peaceful negotiation would be the best way forward to save lives and consume resources and to not risk nuclear war, which is what should be mainstream talking point. And I put that up and it got a lot of traction, and it basically woke this sleeping giant that calls itself NAFO. As best as I can tell, with minimal research, because I don't really care that much, but with minimal research, NAFO is apparently the left-wing version of alt-right groypers. Basically, it's like a bunch of weird accounts that don't have any faces, any names. Like, I got thousands of comments and people trolling me over the weekend, and I saw maybe 3 or 4 accounts that had an actual name and face attached to it, and all of the accounts were like well under 1,000 followers, most under like a couple hundred followers. It was really weird. It was clearly very organized. They were making memes about me, misconstruing my
Some of the memes were so weird.
And I have to say, I think they're left-wingers because Democrats can't meme. We know that. And the memes were really bad. Like, they weren't funny. They weren't good. They weren't even like clever. But they were well circulated. And they basically were trying to say that I was pro-Putin, pro-genocide, which makes total sense since I was arguing for an anti-war stance. And it really made me think back to the days of the Dixie Chicks when you saw people who were against the Iraq and Afghanistan wars being called pro-terrorist, anti-military, anti-American. It was that same kind of language that basically Democrats used to get at the hands of Republicans when they opposed those wars. And now it seems the tables have totally flipped. And we're going to talk about that in our first segment about why some of that might be. But Democrats are pretty much all in on waging a proxy war in Ukraine. And as I said in my video, they don't want peace. They think Ukraine can win this, quote, unquote, win this, which is completely childish, detached from reality, and will get thousands of people more killed, if not millions, if this escalates to a nuclear war in the process. I think they're completely just cracked. But yeah,
Yeah,
NAFO,
I just want to
a
point
whole
out
lot
that
more.
like there's legitimate debate about issues related to Ukraine, right? But they're really distorting your position. So for example, somebody tweeted at you, "Can I strangle her until she gives me half her flat?" Now, I don't think they were literally threatening you. I think they were trying to suggest like you shouldn't have to give up land if you get attacked, but a very strange and aggressive way of making that argument. And then you tweeted this, you quote tweeted this and said, "The number of insane, entitled Ukrainians or their supporters retweeting and replying to my anti-war video with stuff like this is something Americans need to see." So you called them insane and entitled, but you were specifically referring to the weirdos making these borderline violent responses to you. Now they've been photoshopping your face next to dead bodies of Ukrainians and putting entitled Ukrainians in quotes. Like, they're not debating in good faith here.
No, they're also trying to say I'm pro-Trump, which obviously I'm not. Even the video itself, I say this is like one of the few areas where I agree with Trump on anything. So they just seem really disingenuous. They're pretty seedy in their responses. They're not arguing in good faith. And honestly, if their goal is to get people more sympathetic to Ukraine, they're doing the exact opposite. Because I'm about to call my senator and be like, "Quit giving my money to these people." My statement was about NAFO in particular, but I do think, and I'll say this: Ukrainians have a right to defend themselves, to defend their territory if that's what they choose to do, if they think their lives and their
Absolutely.
money are worth it. They don't have a right to demand that our country come in and fund their war or send our people to die or do that to other countries. And that is what they have basically been doing. Their president has been going around and shaking down every other country, trying to get people to fund this and get involved in it. And that's fine. He has a right to make that case, but I don't think that we should have to be involved in this. And I
Not
think that
just
it's a
money
huge
either.
difference.
Zelensky was asking for a US no-fly zone, which would mean we'd be shooting down Russian planes. And so he's saying like we want the US to come fight and so like basically and get our pilots killed or
Yeah, so I think that that's where I draw the line. I will say they haven't changed my mind one bit. They've made me dig my heels in more, and I'm happy to, showcase this to my elected leaders and let them know this kind of behavior is what you're giving my tax dollars to. That makes me pretty upset. I will say, and I've never once, lobbed this kind of thought before because I'm not one that likes conspiracy theories or jokes about these kinds of things. To me, this is the first time I've had an internet mob come after me where I sort of suspect it's the feds. I can't prove it. I don't know how you would even begin to investigate this kind of thing, but it's kind of weird. The video did well. It didn't go viral, and yet it is attracting so much attention. As I mentioned, there is very few actual profiles amongst these thousands of commenters. They're very well organized. I kind of find it hard to believe that this is what people do with their Saturdays and Sundays. I'm a very online person. I make my living off being very online and political, and that is not what I'm doing, memeing people I dislike and trolling them on Saturdays and Sundays. So I feel like if you poked this beast, you might just find some FBI, CIA operatives behind some of these accounts, but I can't prove it. If anybody else wants to spend their time digging into it, have at it. For now, I'm just blocking and moving on with my day. But when it comes to Ukraine, Russia, we need to wind the clock back a good bit and go all the way back to 2016 for our first segment and discuss Russiagate, which is where I think you really started to see these lines of Republicans and Democrats and their opinions towards Russia and Ukraine begin to form. Hey guys, Hannah here. I want to take a second to tell you about a really cool upcoming event. Celebrate liberty in style while connecting with changemakers from across the country. America's Future, the organization that's empowering the next generation of freedom's leaders, is excited to announce its most glamorous gala yet. Join them on Thursday, May 25th at the historic Anderson House, located in DuPont Circle of Washington, D.C. Known as one of D.C.'s most fashionable mansions, it serves as a perfect backdrop for you to walk the red carpet, enjoy the open bar, take in the artwork, and kick off your shoes to tear up the dance floor. Don't miss your chance to clink glasses with inspirational young leaders from across the country. Get your tickets today at americasfuture.org. We know that Russiagate was the talk of the town for many years under Trump's first presidency. This was, of course, the conspiracy theory that Russia was colluding with the Trump campaign in order to get him elected. Most of that was based on something called the Steele dossier, which has been completely debunked. But there's been an investigation going on for some years into this whole mess where you saw the U.S. Justice Department get involved, the FBI get involved, launch multiple investigations into Trump and his campaign staff. And just this week, a report that stems from that investigation has been released to the public, and it is scathing. Let's roll this clip.
Tonight, the FBI is coming under sharp criticism over its investigation into alleged collusion between Donald Trump's 2016 campaign and Russia. CBS's Catherine Herridge tells us the long-awaited special counsel report finds the Bureau rushed into its investigation.
Almost 4 years to the day since he started his investigation, Special Counsel John Durham says the FBI used unverified information when it opened the investigation into candidate Trump's alleged ties to Russia in 2016. Durham concludes senior FBI personnel displayed a serious lack of analytical rigor and relied on investigative leads provided or funded by Trump's political opponents. Trump railed repeatedly against the FBI investigation.
There was absolutely spying into my campaign.
The FBI expanded its Russia probe, known as Crossfire Hurricane, based partly on information from Christopher Steele. Steele, a former British spy, put together research documents alleging possible misconduct between then-candidate Donald Trump and Russia. Durham found that investigators did not and could not corroborate any of the substantive allegations contained in the Steele reporting.
There were multiple, systematic efforts to interfere in our election.
The investigation became Special Counsel Mueller's probe. He did not find sufficient evidence of collusion between Trump and Russia. While Durham acknowledges the FBI was obligated to examine the Russia allegations, he's extremely critical of the Bureau's investigative work. In response, the FBI says it's already undertaken major reforms to address the shortcomings raised by Durham.
This has been a big black eye for a lot of the federal law enforcement.
Bob Anderson is a former senior FBI executive.
It has been a big deal, and I hope that we have clarified all these things that have caused this problem. But in the end, I hope it never happens again.
Wow, this is my shocked face to learn that the FBI's investigation into Trump over Russiagate was shoddy. I mean, we already knew this, but this is like the Inspector General. This is inside the House. They're raising the alarm. It's even worse than we thought, huh?
Well, I think it's important because, yes, you and I already knew this, but I would argue that the vast majority of people on the left have not had to grapple with their own election conspiracy theories that very much started on the left back in 2016, right? And I think that it is something that they have continued to try to dance around. And in fact, I want to read a little bit more reporting on this to get into it, but even the responses to this coming out, you still see people defending their actions from 2016 over many of these investigations and just completely fabricated storylines that people bought into. But a little bit more reporting from CNN, they say that Durham's 300-plus page report also states that the FBI used raw, unanalyzed, and uncorroborated intelligence to launch the Crossfire Hurricane investigation into Trump and Russia, but used a different standard when weighing concerns about alleged election interference regarding Hillary Clinton's campaign. The special counsel did not recommend any new charges against individuals or wholesale charges about how the FBI handles politically charged investigations, though, despite strongly criticizing the agency's behavior, which is just, it's like, I mean, it's pretty much like saying, here, they did it, this was completely fabricated, they're definitely guilty, but no changes necessary, no charges whatsoever. What? And furthermore, they said, and I thought this was so interesting, they kind of dug a little bit more into the differences in how they handled Trump versus Hillary during 2016. And they say Durham knocked the FBI for failing to take several steps before launching the Trump campaign investigations, such as interviewing relevant witnesses, reviewing its own intelligence databases, or using, quote, any of the standard analytical tools typically employed by the FBI in evaluating raw intelligence. Durham suggested that if the FBI had taken those steps, it would have found that U.S. intelligence agencies did not have any evidence tying Trump to Russian leadership officials. The report cites for comparison examples of how the FBI approached investigations concerning former Secretary of State and 2016 Democratic White House nominee Clinton. Durham points specifically to highly significant intelligence the FBI, quote, received from a trusted foreign source, pointing to a Clinton campaign plan to vilify Trump by tying him to Vladimir Putin so as to divert attention away from her own concerns relating to her use of private email servers. Unlike the FBI's opening of a full investigation of unknown members of the Trump campaign based on raw, uncorroborated information, in this separate matter involving a purported Clinton campaign plan, the FBI never opened any type of inquiry, issued any tasking, employed any analytical personnel, or produced any analytical products in connection with information, the report said. Durham notes that the FBI did not open an investigation into a purported plan by foreign operatives to target the Clinton campaign, but rather took other steps in response to those concerns, which included providing defensive briefings for the then Democratic presidential nominee and her staff. That's a bombshell. I mean, that to me is just so egregious that not only did they do this whole thing with virtually no evidence, not only did they totally break their own protocols, but they basically had two different candidates that they treated completely differently and essentially helped run water for the Democratic candidate while they launched an investigation into the Republican one. Take the personalities out of it on its face. That is corrupt. That is election interference by our own agency, I'd say.
Yeah, look, I think people need to remember how disruptive this cloud was that hung over the Trump presidency after he won. I would say for the first 2 full years, constantly CNN was talking about how Trump was possibly compromised, a Russian agent. MSNBC said he's working for Putin. The liberal media, they just pushed this nonstop narrative that he had colluded with Putin to steal the 2016 election, essentially. Now, we know that Russia did interfere in the election, but mostly very ineffectively so, with like memes and Twitter trolls and things that had no measurable impact as far as we can see. And the claim was that not only did the Trump campaign collude with Russia and do this, and he fed into that a little with some of his dumb statements, like when he told Putin, if you're out there, release their emails, or he doesn't help himself with the way he speaks off the cuff about things. And some people in his campaign took meetings they shouldn't have with people connected to Russia. But after they did the Mueller investigation, there was no evidence of collusion, right? The idea that they colluded to steal the election. And so all this media coverage had jumped the gun. And I want people to remember it was so disruptive to the president and his policies and his agenda because it just sucked all the oxygen out of the room. And the coverage really was irresponsible. Here's a super cut of mainstream media, CNN, MSNBC, other cable networks, from the Media Research Center, which is a conservative group. They clipped together a bunch of moments from the coverage just to give you a little sample of what it was like so you don't forget.
Does the public understand just how much trouble the president is in?
To believe that the president isn't compromised requires such a leap of faith.
I think we have all the proof we need of a scandal that's arguably worse than Watergate.
The U.S. president possibly working for the Russians. Possibly an unwitting pawn.
Now, here's what the president said when asked if he was a secret Russian agent.
The president did not directly answer the question.
Why not just say no, if that's the answer?
There is tons of proof of potential collusion.
We have dramatic evidence of collusion.
How is it not collusion? How is all of that not collusion?
A political hurricane is out there at sea for him. We'll call it Hurricane Vladimir, if you will.
Donald Trump knows the noose is tightening.
The noose is tightening.
The noose is tightening, if you will.
The noose is tightening around the president.
The noose is tightening. And I think they're shocked that the noose is tightening and that people might go to jail.
He knows he and POTUS are going to prison.
Well, I think they're all going to end up together in prison, and maybe that's a good thing.
Oh, my God.
The walls appear to be closing in on the president.
The investigative walls are closing in.
He feels the walls closing in.
The walls are closing in.
Trump resigns, quote, once Mueller closes in on him and the family.
Anybody that writes an op-ed and suggests that Donald Trump has not put himself directly in the target of an obstruction charge is just fooling themselves and some very, very stupid, ill-informed readers.
They are the kind of offenses that would call for impeachment hearings.
If someone walked in my office and said I was a subject of a multi-year criminal investigation led by former FBI Director Robert Mueller, I'd wet my pants.
Mueller reminds me of the starfish, which gets itself tightly around the clam and uses all its stuff to weaken and pry open the clam. Now, this is a battle to the death as far as the clam is concerned. If the starfish is able to open him even a little bit, he can get him open all the way, and that's it, of course, for the clam. He's the starfish's lunch.
Look, so even the pretty liberal-leaning Columbia Journalism Review has argued that the coverage of the Russia hoax has further destroyed the American people's trust in the media. I think that's just indisputable at this point, and I've only seen a handful of people from mainstream media really reckon with this development and how wrong they got things. Most of them, it's like they're just pretending this all never happened.
I mean, listening back to this, it is a parade of NPC characters that cannot think aside from the talking points that they're given by their overlords. And they're just repeating the same thing over and over and over. I mean, even the catchphrases that they're using over and over, the noose is tightening. It's crazy to me. There was no intellectualism that went down during this whole affair. There's been very little comeuppance for people who participated in it. And I think that the trust in our institutions dissipating is well-deserved, and I don't think it's coming back, right? The mainstream media made a fool out of itself. It is so hypocritical and has been for some time that we continue to rightfully lambast people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th and point out how utterly ridiculous it was to allege the things that they were alleging about voting machines and the election being stolen in 2020. Utter hogwash. But the right has had to reckon with that and pretty much disavow it. The left was never made to deal with what they did in 2016. And this really was the origins of all this election conspiracy BS. And I still don't think that they're going to really come back and, admit that they got it wrong and show any sort of intellectual humility or honesty or transparency. It's inexcusable the way that they rush to put people in jail for these things. That is what actually blows my mind. This is not something where it's just like, they didn't like their political opponents and they maligned them in the media. No, they were pushing for people to actually lose their freedoms, their lives, their careers over something that was completely fabricated and made up. That's evil and it's sinister. And this is why I think to this day, if you trust the FBI, if you trust the mainstream media, you have to be a fool at this point. You have to be off your rocker and so deep into an echo chamber that we can't even reach in and grab you out of it, because they have unilaterally failed our country over the past decade. And I don't know if it's been this bad always, and we're just actually finding out due to the age of information and the internet and being able to actually poke holes and push back now that you and I are coming up in this era versus when our parents were coming up. Maybe it's always been this way. We know the FBI has always been corrupt. That's for freaking sure. But this level of what I would say is actual collusion between the media and the FBI and the Justice Department and even the former Obama administration to actually interfere in an election. That's what this is, right? This isn't just saying that there was collusion that wasn't there. They were trying to use that to hurt an actual candidate for president.
And sabotage him after he won.
Exactly. And then to undermine somebody who actually was democratically elected, like it or not, get the freak over it. He won. You lost. And you would never accept it for 4 years. And I don't want to hear any of them complain about January 6th or what ended up happening with Trump's election conspiracy theories, which were bad, but you laid the groundwork for it.
Yeah, I want to give credit to one person, Jake Tapper, who's one of the rare voices. I disagree with a lot of what he says, but I respect him. He's on CNN. He is calling out the fact that they got this wrong. Take a listen.
The report is now here. It has dropped. And it might not have produced everything of what some Republicans hoped for. It is, regardless, devastating to the FBI, and to a degree, it does exonerate Donald Trump. A couple quotes here from Durham's report. One, based on the review of Crossfire Hurricane, that's the investigation into Trump and Russia, and related intelligence activities, we conclude that the Justice Department and FBI failed to uphold their important mission of strict fidelity to the law in connection with certain events and activities described in the report. And he says about, quote, regarding certain personnel intimately involved in the matter, there was a, quote, predisposition to open an investigation into Trump. He is basically saying, he's not, these are not criminal allegations, but he's saying that this was unprofessional and failed to meet the standards of the Justice Department and the FBI.
Yeah, so kudos to Jake Tapper for at least being honest about this and reckoning with it. I just think everyone in mainstream media should be forced to do so.
I agree. Jake Tapper, while I also disagree with him a lot, I'd say he's honest. I mean, he seems pretty based in that way. He's truly upfront. He seems pretty, I don't know, above book, I guess is what I'd say about him. I definitely disagree with him at times, but it's what you would hope to see as a bare minimum in journalism, and yet it's so rare. But I saw this funny thing on Twitter from one of our mutuals, Mary Catherine Ham, who used to be on CNN, And she posted one of her old reels from her back in the day. It says, revisiting the old highlight reel of me disagreeing about Russiagate and everyone looking at me like I was crazy. I love that she posted this because this is how people were treated if you in any way push back on this completely made up conspiracy theory back in 2016. Even to this day, I would say in many circles, you still would be completely mocked and laughed out of the room if you tried to tell people that this is actually made up and didn't really go down how you were told it went down. So there were some people who tried as best they could in the mainstream media to push back, to raise the alarm, but they really couldn't get much traction at that point. Another thing I thought was really interesting is that Andrew McCabe, who was running the FBI for the vast majority of this time period, he is also not backing down or apologizing. He thinks he did nothing wrong, Brad. You have to watch this clip.
There is absolutely nothing new in this report, and I stand by the investigative decisions that we made to open the investigation first on the Trump campaign and the possibility that the Russians are trying to influence it, and then later on Donald Trump himself.
Yeah, I guess I'm not that surprised because I feel like when you invest something, so much of your own credibility and career into something, to admit you were wrong and did it so horribly and corruptly would just be a bridge too far for most people. So the cognitive dissonance here is what's really on display, I think.
I guess that's right, but to me, I feel like the one chance you have for a redemption arc is to come out and say, I was absolutely wrong. I got caught up in my own bias. I was surrounded by groupthink and I made a lot of strategic errors. And we need to make sure that we have systems in place inside this agency to ensure that doesn't happen again and these same kind of mistakes don't continue to repeat themselves. Instead, he doubles down. And so, no, I'm not surprised, especially given the caliber of people operating within this agency, but it is just completely disappointing. I think it's such a failure of leadership. We really are lacking for people of actual character to step up to the plate in this country and really lead us where we need to go. So I'm glad he's out. What a loser. But it is annoying to see that even when you have all evidence staring you in the face, proving that you were unequivocally incorrect, you still cannot apologize or admit any fault. But, you know, it's not him. He's not just alone in not being willing to admit fault. But he's not the only person who is refusing to take accountability, who is high-ranking and on the left right now, and even within the Biden administration. One of the people that was originally on Clinton's campaign staff that actually released a statement first trying to point to Trump and his secret line of communication to Russia. His name is Jake Sullivan. That guy, he is actually now in the White House as President Biden's national security advisor. So great. We still have these people pretty high up. As for the response, there are some in Congress pushing for some kind of accountability in response to this. I know Jim Jordan is going to have a congressional testimony on the report next week. And Mike Lee, who is a sometimes based senator, he's actually calling for some reforms to the FBI. He says it falls to Congress to step in where the FBI has faltered. The need for comprehensive legislative reform is clear, starting with the secret surveillance of Americans under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA, which is, of course, how they got a lot of these sketchy warrants to investigate these people in the first place. He said the machinery of the state was used to falsify a FISA warrant against an American citizen, justifying it with information they didn't and never were able to corroborate. There wasn't even a hint of truth here. The basic safeguards of government failed. State power was politically weaponized and used to discredit an elected president on false premises. So, I mean, who knows if Congress will actually take action? Doubt it. But I like to see at least some people speaking out that they are trying to push back against this, because it remains that this could be done to any of us, right? They used this sketchy FISA court to get warrants. They prosecuted and persecuted these people. They ruined their reputations, all on no evidence. And there's currently no, repercussions for that. And these people have no ability to come in and get any kind of restitution for what was done to them. So it is the structure that still remains that is problematic and that needs to be dismantled so that these agencies cannot continue to weaponize the government against any of us. On the other hand, what they've proposed so far, as far as the FBI goes, which I think this is laughable, they are floating around a proposal to create a career position for a nonpartisan FBI lawyer or agent who would be tasked with challenging steps taken in politically sensitive investigations, including surveillance warrant applications. And I love Terry Kibbe, who's a friend of ours, said 480 interviews, 1 million documents reviewed, 7 search warrants, 190 subpoenas, 4 years, $6.5 million, hiring one more guy who will finally keep the FBI honest. Priceless. It's absurd to me to think we're just going to create another government bureaucrat to deal with the government bureaucrats. Yeah, right. Get out of here.
Yeah, no. Also, we have to talk about the media here a little bit more, because don't forget that the Washington Post actually won a Pulitzer Prize for its coverage of supposed Russian meddling in the 2016 election. Here's from the Pulitzer Prize Board. They're getting this award for deeply sourced, relentlessly reported coverage in the public interest that dramatically furthered the nation's understanding of Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election and its connections to the Trump campaign, the president-elect's transition team, and his eventual administration. So some of what they reported about Russia's attempts to interfere in the election, it was true. Some of what they reported about the Trump campaign was true, but the big narrative they pushed was false, and yet they won a Pulitzer Prize for it.
Yeah, that should be rescinded. And also, let's keep in mind that the State Department is currently funding a research agency that says these outlets are so much more credible than outlets like the Washington Examiner. What? That's utterly absurd. But okay, that all being said, I want to dig into what I think is actually the biggest fallout of all of this, which is the current Ukraine-Russia conflict. We touched on this in the opening, but I feel really strongly that Russiagate laid the foundation not only for some of our involvement in this conflict, but certainly for the political attitudes and sort of lines being drawn within our society as far as opinions go towards this this war that we're currently involving ourselves in. And I think it's interesting because the lines flipped quickly. I want to play this clip very briefly of Obama back when he was debating Mitt Romney in the 2012 election, where he basically put Mitt Romney down for suggesting Russia was even a threat.
Governor Romney, I'm glad that you recognize that al-Qaeda is a threat, because a few months ago, when you were asked what's the biggest geopolitical threat facing America, you said Russia. Not al-Qaeda, you said Russia. In the 1980s are now calling to ask for their foreign policy back, because the Cold War has been over for 20 years. But Governor, when it comes to our foreign policy, you seem to want to import the foreign policies of the 1980s, just like the social policies of the 1950s and the economic policies of the 1920s.
Yeah, so just a few years ago, it was Republicans who were the Russia hawks and Democrats were the doves on Russia, saying that it was, outdated to worry about Russia. That's Cold War stuff. But then in the Trump era, Russia, which in many ways is a very messed up country and has horrible leadership that does horrible things, but it got conflated, Russia and Putin, with Trumpism and MAGA and the Donald. And so Democrats became all of a sudden ultra Russia hawks simply because they were so anti-Trump and hated him so much. And that's why I think, with the exception of a few true anti-war leftists who are out there, most of the center left in this country has gone all in on the proxy war with Ukraine, all in on blank check support for Ukraine, doesn't seem to worry about the potential for escalation or whether we're really doing more harm than good. And because they Russia bad. And it's like, that's not a way, superimposing your hatred for your domestic political rivals is no way to evaluate your stance on geopolitical issues and conflicts. But I think it's undeniable that the Russophobia from the Trump era has influenced the way the Democratic Party currently views the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And that's really, really not a good way to do policy.
No, it's not. But I think you're absolutely correct. I think that it's created a very black and white sort of narrative for people, a good versus evil, a very clear line of where you should fall in this conflict based on your political affiliation. And that's honestly what the military-industrial complex needs to wage its wars. It needs you to feel compelled. It needs you to feel like there's a good versus bad. It needs you to feel like you're fighting your political opponents through these wars. There's no reason you see the Instagram crowd adding Ukrainian flags to their profiles aside from this conflation that we've seen in the mainstream media and online, right? They have found that putting a Ukrainian flag in their bio is how they represent that they are on the left. They think they're great humanitarians. They think they're standing up to fascism and Trumpism and Putin, that they're one all and the same. In reality, one, you have a lot of different ideologies you're mixing up in there, and the battle lines are not drawn like you think they are. Two, there's a lot more nuance to the actual conflict, right? Russia's completely wrong to invade, but it doesn't have anything to do with sort of the left versus right in America battles that a lot of people, I think, who are activists online seem to think are there. So I firmly believe that Russiagate did lay this groundwork. And I think it's just disappointing to see what big sheep most people are. If you have a party that is mostly made up of people who think they're anti-war for decades and decades and decades, that can be flipped on a dime just like that to supporting interventionism and nation building and even regime change, which is what a lot of them are pushing for. It just shows you that the vast majority of people in this country are not very educated in order to be participating in their political system in the first place. They certainly don't have higher principles aside from whatever the tribe they're in tells them that they should support. And I think similarly to what we saw under Trump, where you saw the GOP essentially abandon many of its free market principles and many of its limited government ideals, you see the same thing happening on the left now, that as soon as it's in the party's interest or leadership's interest or whatever to be involved in this conflict, they simply tell their people, they put it through the pipeline, you should support this conflict, and they're all in on war. It's kind of astounding to watch it happen, but I think that it's, it really does prove a lot of the psychology around groupthink and hive mentality correct. And people need to be more aware of your brain's propensity to those things so that you can be on guard against them.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll leave it there for the Russia talk and move on to our second subject, which is that charges have been brought in the case about the death of Jordan Neely. Now, people have probably heard about this case by now. We didn't discuss it when it initially happened because we didn't catch it in the right time with our recording schedule, and everyone was talking about it anyway. But for a refresher, this is the case of the homeless and clearly a mentally ill man who used to be a Michael Jackson impersonator, but had a long, unfortunately, criminal background. And anyway, he was on a New York City subway car, acting very erratically, threatening people around him, scaring people. And a Marine named Daniel Penny stepped in to restrain him, put him in a chokehold. Certainly didn't intend to kill him, but accidentally did, and he died, and it was declared a homicide. And this sparked this debate because you had people on the left, far left, but also like mainstream media, calling this a murder. AOC called it a murder. In the media, you'd hear people calling it a lynching, which is just insane because it wasn't about race. One of the people that actually helped restrain him was also Black. It had nothing to do with race. And also, it wasn't an intentional killing, right? And lynching is when you go out looking to kill somebody. That's very clearly not what happened here. At the same time, you have some people on the right insisting that this guy, Daniel Penny, is a hero and that he deserves a medal, not any sort of criminal charges. But I always was very skeptical of the idea that this was a murder, but I did think maybe it could be a manslaughter, which is when you unintentionally kill someone. And that's the charge that has been brought. So here is from the New York Times. On Friday, 11 days after Neely's death, prosecutors charged Penny with second-degree manslaughter. To prove the charge, they will have to demonstrate beyond a reasonable doubt that Penny recklessly caused Neely's death. Under New York state law, a person is deemed to act recklessly when he engages in conduct which creates or contributes to a substantial and unjustifiable risk that another person's death will occur. So, as this article goes on to explain, what will really come down is, was this justifiable or unjustifiable? The decision to restrain him, but also the amount of force if it ends up being deemed excessive. Did you keep restraining him for a long time, even after he went limp? And I think that's why I take no position on whether or not he's guilty of these charges. I think the facts will matter a lot here. I could see this going to trial and him being acquitted if through the facts it's really shown that this guy was a danger and that he didn't only restrain him as long as he had to. I can also imagine an alternative set of facts where maybe he is found guilty on this because they decide he was justified to intervene, but that he was then reckless. Like he kept restraining him after he was already limp. He used way more force than was necessary, something like that. But I trust a jury to figure out the right call here.
Well, that's one reason you and I didn't really want to talk about this last week when the case was just breaking. I hate jumping into these matters. I think there's always a rush to, one, give an opinion, and two, politicize something. And we've definitely seen that happening already. The fact is, we don't have all the facts, and a jury will be best able to determine, was he right to intervene in the first place? Did he use excessive force after he did intervene? Those questions will get sorted out later on. I do think for now, the charges of manslaughter are appropriate. Manslaughter is when you accidentally kill somebody, right? You don't really see the prosecution, I think, overreaching here, which would be saying like second-degree murder or things like that.
Which is what activists want. They wanted that.
But yeah, well, and that's what I was going to say is I think that's why people are pretty upset right now, because the left fully has this narrative that, one, this was murder, two, it was racially driven, three, there was no reason for this guy to intervene. And they've gone so far, as some of the media, to even say, you should just sit there and get assaulted. There was one woman that I saw last week, I quote tweeted on TV, basically saying, I got slapped on the subway by a crazy person and I just took it. That's not the line. It should never be what we are asking society to withstand before you intervene. But I think that on the right, you see a rush to lionize this guy, to say he's a hero. It's very reminiscent of what we saw happen in the Kyle Rittenhouse case. And I think same thing with that. It was best to wait for all information to come out. So what I want to comment more on today is not what verdict we think should come out of this, but more the conversations that I think the case is sparking that I think are really important. Some of this we've delved into in the past. We recently talked extensively on our views about mental health and institutionalization, which I think is a very important conversation we need to be having in this country. You can go back and listen to that if you haven't. But some of that bleeds over into this conversation. You had a very mentally ill man. He had dozens of interactions and arrests with police. He had been what I would label a nuisance in New York City for some time.
And worse.
And worse, right? He actually was committing real crimes against people. And you have this system, I've seen it up close in person, where basically we continue to dump the mentally ill and the drug addicted into the criminal justice system, where they are not getting treatment. They get arrested over and over. They simply get turned back out onto the streets. They continue escalating. And nothing really happens until something very bad happens. Either they hurt somebody else or they are hurt. And I think that right now what we're seeing in this country is a complete failure by our institutions to meaningfully grapple with where is the line between civil liberties and ensuring that society is protected by people who are very unwell and who cannot make competent decisions for themselves. That's something that we have to address here, and that New York City is certainly not addressing. But I also think that there is a huge failing by police in many cities right now to basically deal with the situation at hand. Is it fair that they're being asked to? That's a whole other conversation. I would say no, there should be other systems in place and things that are largely intervening when we have somebody like this. But for right now, the way things are lined up is it is the police's responsibility to ensure that these kinds of people don't harm others. And that's not happening. Instead, you've seen New York City basically hand the subway system over to people who could become violent. And I've lived in New York City, right? I have been on these trains even before it got to the level of problematic that it is right now. And I've seen people acting like this, and it is quite scary. And you never know. Like, you don't know the minute somebody goes from ranting and verbally threatening you on a train to pulling out a knife and shanking you, to pulling out a gun and shooting you. And what I witnessed in New York City when I was riding the subway is that people would just get off, or they'd move trains, right? And it was just like you were on edge and you'd get off as soon as you could, move to another car, disrupt your own commute to try to get where you're going, just to make sure you don't get stabbed or pushed onto the tracks by a crazy person ranting. And so I don't like the left's insinuation that you should just sit there and take it. I don't like people saying that this is just how we should live, that we should just have to, deal with this and be able to make the calculation of when you intervene and when you don't. That's how you get vigilante justice. So yeah, I think that we have to actually look at what's failing in our system, because if police don't intervene, if there are not ways to deal with this, people will take up their own self-defense, and they have a right to do that. And it's going to not be allocated pristinely. And that's why we don't want anarchy. That's why, even though I have major issues with policing in this country and think it needs restructuring, we do need police. We do need a political system to deal with issues like this, so that you don't have citizens taking up, arms and deciding these matters for themselves.
Yeah, I think that the truth is that the system failed here, because Jordan Neely should not have been on that train. One, we've seen a big rise in subway crime, but even in this individual case, looking at his past, and no, it's not victim blaming, right? We're not saying that this is relevant to the actual murder, like killing, because Daniel didn't know about his criminal past. So, but it is relevant because he never should have been on that train. He had been arrested more than 36 times. This is reading from the New York Times again. Largely for minor transgressions, though in 4 cases for punching people twice in the subway. He was on a list maintained by the city of the 50 homeless people in greatest need of urgent assistance. Most notably in November 2021, Neely punched and seriously injured a 67-year-old woman as she exited the subway. David French writes in this Times article, an assault of that kind is profoundly dangerous, and any person who commits such an act should face meaningful consequences. So it goes on here. But in short, I agree with David when what he says here is, in short, Neely should not have been in the subway car. He should have still been in the treatment facility or in jail. I think that's obviously true.
Yeah, punching somebody can actually kill them. That's not a minor offense. That kind of violence makes me so angry. I mean, not that all violence doesn't make me angry, to be clear. I am very bothered by all of it. But often violence is done by people known to one another. It's crimes of passion, random acts of violence against people you don't know, who've never done anything to you, who are just going about their day, going about their commute, and you're going to assault them. It's inexcusable, and that's terrifying. And I really think a lot of people fail to understand what that sort of ongoing bodily threat is like mentally. When I lived in New York City, and I'd visited New York City a lot before, but to be honest, I always took Ubers everywhere. I kind of had, the highbrow lifestyle when I was just there visiting. Living there, even as a upper middle class person, you're on the train, you're walking around in the streets. You are not allowed to carry a gun. You're actually not allowed to carry like mace or a taser or any kind of self-defense. It's not just guns that they ban you from using there. You are so vulnerable to these kinds of people. And again, when they do act out like this, nothing happens. They get arrested, booked. We spend some taxpayer dollars going through the whole circus show, and then they get sent back out onto the street. It's inexcusable that this man was on that train. He absolutely did not deserve to die in that situation. But that is, again, I don't think that this person was motivated by anything other than self-defense. I think that that's pretty clear from the interactions. It definitely doesn't seem to be a racially driven thing. Definitely doesn't seem to be that he wanted to kill this person. I think he was a rank and file person who felt threatened and maybe jumped the gun in intervening, but felt afraid for his safety and for the safety of those around him. And he didn't act alone. Several other people, like you mentioned, joined him. So it wasn't just him that felt that this guy was escalating and might be a threat. Citizens should not have to make those decisions, and they certainly shouldn't have to hang back and not intervene when they do feel clear that somebody could be a threat, right? I think that when you see people be charged or certainly aggressively charged in these kind of interactions, it actually disincentivizes people from intervening, which we want to see happen. If you're getting mugged on the street, if you're getting jumped, if you're being stabbed by a crazy person, you want a bunch of people to intervene and get this guy off of you. So I think the we really should be debating here is what is that line and why are citizens having to determine it? So one thing I do want to address before we move on, because I can already hear people in the comments bringing this up, and I've seen these arguments online, is that all of this comes down to defund the police. The reason that this guy was on the streets, the reason police can't adequately take care of the subway and reduce violence is because they're demoralized and they've been defunded and poor police. No, get out of here. That is not what happened. It's not what happened anywhere, but it's certainly not what happened in New York City. A study of budgets over 400 American cities over the past 5 years actually shows that despite persistent claims, there was no mass defunding of police. Police departments got the same average cut of the city budget in 2021 as they did in previous years in the cities that were examined. New York City police in particular, though, have gotten humongous pay raises. The current mayor is a former cop. He's back the blue no matter who. And he just announced a huge pay boost for the NYPD amid budget cuts for other city departments. According to reports, around 23,000 members of the New York Police Department can expect their first raises in 6 years, as other city agencies were collectively asked to cut $1 billion annually from their budget. This agreement will retroactively start as of August 1st, 2017, offering annual raises from 2.25% to 4%. The top police pay will now sit at $131,500 per year, with starting pay at $55,000. So they were not defunded. They are not understaffed. They don't really get a huge bunch of sympathy from me here. at all. They need to get on the streets and do their jobs. We've continued to see crime escalate despite the fact that a lot of them are getting a lot more money. That's a problem.
It's not actually, though, necessarily in case of if they kept arresting Neely and then he kept getting let out. That's not necessarily on police, though I agree with your general point. That also becomes a question for the prosecutors.
Absolutely. It's definitely a systemic failure. I just don't want to hear people say that it's something about the police not having enough money or resources. That's not the case. It's never been the case anywhere. Please stop repeating that narrative. It's exhausting.
All right, we need to move on to our quick hits segment. Up first, check out this CBS News segment where they talk about why we need to start eating bugs to save the planet. Take a listen.
We all know how important insects are for the environment, but climate researchers say bugs could be a game changer in the fight to protect the planet in ways you may not have imagined. Tina Kraus has the story from London.
Adding some insects to the mix is customary in the kitchen in some parts of the world. Now climate experts think that protein-packed pests could offer a real solution to the global food crisis. Scientists in Germany are not pushing to get the critters on your plate. They see another benefit.
Our interest is to make insects as an alternative for the use of soybean-derived proteins.
Large-scale growth of soybeans has been blamed for extensive deforestation. Since farming insects takes less land and water, these researchers believe bugs could become the livestock feed of the future.
To have a more sustainable production of proteins, we need alternatives, and I see insects as a perfect tool.
Experts also developed a fungi that converts organic waste into a diet for these soldier flies.
And you can make so many things out of insects and to make the world better.
And with insect farming booming around the world, researchers are busy as bees looking for more climate-friendly fixes. Tina Kraus, CBS News.
It's estimated up to 1.2 trillion insects are raised on farms each year as companies race to find a high-protein, low-carbon solution to feed animals and the world's population. CBS Saturday Morning. We'll be right back.
Okay, so look, I don't really care if they want to feed bugs to livestock, but they also threw out in the population at the end there. They showed the bugs in the pan being cooked in some cultures in the world. I am not eating bugs. They care so much about climate change. That's fine. I think we're not going to be able to do anything about it, to be honest. But they will literally try to get people to eat bugs before just doing nuclear power. It's a hard pass from me.
I've said it once, I'll say it until I'm blue in the face. The climate change agenda will succeed at doing one thing and one thing alone. It is not fixing the climate. It will only succeed in making us all poorer and having a much worse quality of life. I won't eat the bugs. I won't do it. Put me up against the wall. I'm not eating the bugs. It's horrific to even watch. I don't even want to take a worm and line a fish hook with it. It grosses me out so much. I'm not putting it in my mouth. That's absurd. That guy's like outright giddy talking about this. He's like, we'll make them eat the bugs. Like, oh God. I'm so freaked out. I actually have chills right now. That is heinous. I spend a lot of money, just to keep bugs out of my house. I don't even want to look at bugs, much less eat them. I can't stand this. And the fact that there's so many people that are just like, yep, give me a spoonful, anything for the environment. No. If it's eat the bugs or let the world end, let the world end. It's had its course. Like, we're out. I'm done. I don't want my kids having any bugs. No, not doing this. The whole thing is heinous.
Yeah, if people want to eat bugs, I don't really care. But the idea that this is going to be some sort of societal-wide solution, it's not going to catch on. It's simply not. No. People are not going to eat the bugs. And again, it's like we could literally have zero emissions energy if we just did nuclear power. But they would rather try to have us replace our whole grid with, or our whole farming system with bug farming, which is just a creepy idea in and of itself.
Also, isn't this stemming from Germany? Did I catch that right? This is coming from Germany, the country that has basically eviscerated its entire energy grid and is in dire straits now.
Well, they rolled back their nuclear power, so that was a mistake.
Right, exactly. The only people going for this is Germany, which is off its rocker when it comes to the climate issues right now, and Australia. I know people in Australia like to eat bugs. I bet
Greta's down. I bet Greta eats some bugs.
Greta
or would.
Definitely wakes up. She eats a spoonful of flies every morning. Did you ever see that video? It was a weird like Facebook series. I can't remember who put it on, but it would have actors on doing kind of like weird things that were innate to their culture. And they brought Nicole Kidman on one time, and she's just sitting there popping crickets and bugs and talking about their different tastes. And it lives in my memory, scotch free. I cannot get out of my head. If you want to do it, go for it. I'm not doing it. I just, the links they go to, right? You shouldn't have, basically, they don't want you to have air conditioning. They want you to eat bugs. They want to take away your gas stove. They want you to basically take a horse and buggy to go to Target. I'm done with these people. Like, they're not serious. Again, if you want to talk about actual solutions to climate, let's talk nuclear. There's plenty of actual serious adults in the room when it comes to this issue. You're not listening to them. You're not coming to the table. You're more concerned with preventing people from eating meat. It's about everything else but the climate, honestly, when it comes to these people.
All right, up next, we've got a good old anti-capitalist TikTok to react to. Hannah, take a listen to this interesting perspective.
Explaining economic systems for Americans. Capitalism means rich people own the government. Yeah, you can have democracy under capitalism, but you're essentially only choosing people who are on the same side. Why is America invading the Middle East for oil? Change it to, why are rich people invading the Middle East for oil? Why does America hate communism? No. Why do rich people hate communism? Makes a lot more sense.
So, did you know that capitalism is just when rich people own the government? If you look it up in your econ textbook, that's the definition you'll find.
I lost IQ points watching that. That was such a misconstruction of information that I almost thought it was satire. He's like, let me make this real clear for you. And then proceeded to completely jumble every possible definition on the table. Like, what? And I mean, I love TikTok, but fact check your TikToks, people. I have to constantly remind myself that too. Every time I see something on TikTok, I'm like, maybe I should double check this, because people can say anything on TikTok, and a lot of them are completely off base. Capitalism is the exact opposite of what he says. It's where you don't have government involvement in the market. People are just freely buying and trading amongst themselves. So rich people owning the government has nothing to do with capitalism. And in fact, I would say that's more akin to what you would see in socialist countries, where a few small group of rich people tend to take over the means of production and control the rest of the country and the market.
What a little communism. He was talking about communism. He's like, why do people hate communism? Because rich people hate communism. I think it has more to do with the 100 million bodies from the 20th century. But that's just a thought what it might be. And also, like, under no system do the elite control the government more than communism. Right? It's like the Russian oligarchs are not diehard capitalists. They're state cronies. I don't know how people understand this. In a truly hardcore capitalist system, the government would be doing very little besides protecting the national defense, police and property rights, and, building roads, but very little in terms of no subsidies, no special regulations, rigging the rules. All the things that rich people lobby for are actually big government. They're literally interventions against capitalism. And that's what the rich people lobby the government to support.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that if really you want to get into it, where real capitalists would come down, like you and I, is saying you really only need the government to uphold capitalism in a small number of ways. You need a government court system to uphold contracts that are made peacefully amongst different parties in society. You need a national defense to ensure people don't come steal the riches that are created from capitalism and overtake the country. You need a police system to ensure that people are not having their property or their personhood violated. And that's pretty much it. Everything else that the government does is actually an attack on capitalism, and true capitalists are against it. The one small bit of truth that was in there was when he said rich people want to invade the Middle East for oil. I'll give him a little bit on that, but that was also randomly mixed into these definitions. I just think that if our public government schools cannot do the bare minimum of ensuring that people know basic definitions of their economic system when they graduate, it should be dismantled. I mean, that's just utterly absurd that you could live in a purportedly capitalist society and not even have a basic definition of these terms. I don't understand.
Hey, that's what the kids are learning on the TikTok these days. So, all right, let's move on to our mailbag and see what viewers had to say about last week's episode. This first one is for you, Hannah. GWN says, how can I send Hannah something to put on her new shelves? Well, it looks like you've already actually found a bunch of things.
Yeah, I think that was a nicely meant comment. I'm going to take it that way. I would love gifts to put on my shelves because this kind of stuff is actually really expensive. But last week, my shelves were not decorated. It took until 1 a.m. the night before to get this whole Murphy bed system installed. So I didn't have time to go shopping and decorate. I've since done so. I'm still waiting for a few more pieces to add to it. But I lucked out. I went to a used bookstore around the street from me, and I got a ton of like old hardbook classic books for my case, some of which I've read, some of which I haven't. So I'm very excited about that. I hope people like my decorating choices. It's only going to get better from here. All right. What do we got up next? Batman says, in the U.S., if you disrupt a public event, you will get arrested. There are always some regulations on where and when you can protest no matter what country you go to. You libertarians want to destroy all of our institutions and begin society anew. Sometimes you are no better than the communists. Glory to the king. I did subscribe, though.
We'll take it. We'll take the sub.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Keep tuning in. I mean, he's not wrong. If you disrupt a public event, you will get arrested depending on the method in which you do it in the U.S. I don't know.
But they weren't actually disrupting it, though.
Yeah,
that's the thing.
They weren't really disrupting. They were protesting outside. I don't think you would.
And you are allowed to do that in the U.S. In fact, the right of people to uphold hateful signs outside of a veteran's funeral has been upheld. Like we do have very robust protections for protests. So
that's correct. And also, I would just say when he says libertarians want to destroy all our institutions, I would say we want to restore our institutions back to what they were intended to be when the country was first founded and have now absolutely run away from.
All right, next up, Blight Blaster says, Brad, Dr. Pepper is gross. Sir, phooey on you and phooey on your family. Immediate unsubscribe. I'm kidding. Y'all are great. Yeah, I knew that one was going to be controversial, but...
I like phooey on you. I'm going to use that from now on. Julia says, love you guys. So tired of both sides. Dude, us too.
Yeah, seriously. Noopy says, glad I found this channel. Hope you get more subscribers. Thank you.
Thea says, next time you come to Colorado, White Claws on me. Yes. Always happy to support another liberty-loving, seltzer-drinking woman. Love it.
Jonathan Brady says, God save the king. A young country like the United States will never understand the traditions of 1,000 years. And we don't have to, because we whooped your ass in a war. So.
Bye. Secret says, not sure why Hannah dislikes England. I don't think I said I dislike England. I didn't say it.
You did
but
say they're unremarkable other than the royal family.
I will say I went to London one time and I did not. I was very unimpressed. I had some of the worst meals of my life there. And I was eating like Michelin-starred restaurants, right? I wasn't skimping. And it was gross and it was rainy and it kind of just felt like a rainy New York City. So I guess I don't like England, if I'm being honest, so far.
The Iron Fox says, we are in the iron age of media now. Indie content creators are gaining more and more steam. Yeah, I think so. And that's what we're trying to tap into with base politics.
Exactly. GWN says, I work in film and TV production as part of the crew, and I'm not a fan of unions. Like you said, the only reason I am in one is because you have to be in order to work. I really have no sympathy for these writers. The streaming services are in trouble because people are tired of paying for the garbage that they keep putting out, which is largely their fault. I have worked on a lot of trash that the studios spend an enormous amount of money to produce that no one really watches. The crew does not even watch it because they know it sucks.
Savage.
I mean, that's savage, but also, like, I feel for them. Working in music, we felt the same way. I mean, that's one reason I wanted to leave. I was like, we put out crap, utter garbage, and I don't believe in it. And why do I want to spend my life working on this when there's really good art that could get out there? But that's not what the industries are pumping. Entertainment is so broken. And that's
my sister geeked out that when she found out you worked for Taylor Swift's label.
Yeah, I really was an OG Taylor fan. And I want to say when I moved to Nashville, which was 2007, she was on her first album. It was just breaking. And I got straight up bullied for liking her. Like, people being like, oh, you like that? That's not art. She's not any good. When I went to intern for her label, I was told by all of my upperclassmen that I was an idiot, that I needed to intern for a major label, that I'd never get a job working for a little company like Big Machine Records. Yes, like I'm not joking. I really got bullied over my support and belief that Big Machine Records was the future, and look who was right.
There you go. Maxwell says, as long as you claim to be gay, you are still a child living in an adult's body. Okay, what? Groomer. I don't even understand this comment.
Why are
I mean, it's
so many...
I guess he's homophobic. He's like saying it's wrong to claim to be gay. Sis, I don't think I'm claiming it.
I think, what? Why are there so many cracked people? And why do they want it to be known that they're cracked online? Question for the ages.
I don't know.
Let's move on to our hot takes. I'll go first. I have mine ready. And mine is that bacon is delicious, but it's too much work. I made the mistake of trying to cook bacon this week, and it was messy, and it took forever, and I'm never doing it again, to be honest. It's just, I don't think it's worth the work at all. And it's also not good for you. So
I just get it when I go out to eat.
That's what I'm doing from now on. I'm just going to have it on like a breakfast sandwich or plate from here on out, but I will never cook bacon again.
All right. My hot take is that slow cookers are underrated. I've been cooking things with them lately, and they just make it so much easier and so much more idiot proof. And so the crock pot for the win.
Oh, I agree with that. And also the air fryer for the win. Those
we also have that.
Alone. Yeah, that's pretty much the only reason I eat at home. Those two things. All right, guys, that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. As always, leave us a comment or a review. We'll read it on air. Hope you enjoyed the episode. And until next week, stay based.
Yeah.